It started with a smell. Not the kind you'd notice right away. Not rotten, not foul, just off. Like metal and rot mixed with something you couldn't quite name. It lingered low near the ground and always strongest near my driveway, especially on humid mornings. Most people probably wouldn't have paid attention to it. But I wasn't most people. I spent 30 years working as a municipal engineer, dealing with everything from faulty sewage lines to methane leaks under cul-de-sacs. I knew what dangerous smelled like, even when it whispered. At first, I thought maybe a small animal had died under the crawl space again. Wouldn't be the first time a possum curled up and never got back up. But the scent didn't come from under the house, it came from the ground. More specifically, the soil along the HOA-maintained sidewalk that cut across the front edge of my property. I brought it up at the monthly meeting. You know, the kind fluorescent-lit folding chairs over sugared lemonade, and the usual suspects complaining about mailbox paint codes. I stood up, waited my turn, and said, I think there might be a gas leak under Lot 23's sidewalk area. I've smelled it for the past few mornings. It's faint, but it's there. The room went quiet for a second, and then Jason Landry, our HOA president, chuckled like I'd just claimed I saw Bigfoot watering my begonias. I think we'd know if there was a leak, Tom, he said, brushing imaginary lint from his too-tight golf polo. The board hasn't approved any gas line work in that section. That was exactly my point, and exactly what scared me. Well, someone's been digging, I replied calmly. There are disturbed areas near the sidewalk, not just roots, trenching. I know what it looks like. Jason leaned forward, his voice tightening. Are you accusing the HOA of something? I didn't blink. I'm telling you there's something wrong. And if it's gas, it's not something to ignore. I left that meeting with exactly what I expected eye rolls, a warning notice for unsubstantiated disruption of HOA proceedings, and an email 2 days later stating that any further accusations without evidence would be met with fines. That's how the game is played in Maplebrook Estates. The HOA doesn't take kindly to being questioned, especially not by people like me, retired widowed with too much time and too many facts on my hands. Most of my neighbors avoided conflict with the board. They just wanted to live peacefully and not deal with the petty tyrannies that came with living in a covenant-controlled community. But I knew what buried mistakes could cost, and I had already lost too much in my life to stay silent again. I didn't tell them the full reason I was on edge. 10 years earlier in another town, a pipeline failure had taken 3 lives. One of them was a woman named Meredith, my wife. She had been helping a friend paint a nursery when a poorly repaired gas line under the home gave way. The report said the ignition source was a flicked light switch. Instant, total, irreversible. So yes, I knew the smell, and I knew what it meant. Still, I needed more than my nose to push this further. Over the next week, I started keeping a log. I took notes on wind direction, humidity, scent intensity. I snapped pictures with timestamps, small holes in the ground, fresh fill-in dirt near the curb. I even set up a trail cam hidden behind my hedges, pointed right at the sidewalk. 3 nights later, it caught something. At 2:13 a.m., a crew rolled in, no markings on the trucks, no cones, no permits. They worked under portable lights and headlamps, silent, except for the occasional clang of tools and hiss of pressure equipment. They stayed for just under an hour. And when they left, the trench was gone, filled, padded, and dusted with grass seed, like it had never been there. I copied the footage and uploaded it to an encrypted cloud account. Then I forwarded a still to the HOA email, politely requesting an explanation. I didn't expect a response. I got one anyway, though not from the board. The next morning, someone left a note wedged into the slats of my fence. Plain white paper, no envelope. Just 6 words in thick black marker. Mind your business or else. I read it twice. Then I burned it. They wanted silence. What they didn't know was I'd lived through fire before. And I wasn't afraid to walk straight back into it if it meant saving someone else. Something was buried under Maplebrook. And whatever it was going to blow one way or another. The next HOA meeting felt different. The usual attendees were there, Mrs. Dupree with her 3 little dogs, yapping under her chair, the Tron family whispering quietly in the back, and a few new faces I didn't recognize, probably newer residents just trying to get involved. But there was something else, tension. It clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Jason Landry stood at the front clipboard in hand smile too wide, voice too chipper. Before we get started on community events and seasonal finds, he said, tapping his pen like a gavel, we'd like to announce an exciting infrastructure improvement for our neighborhood. I leaned forward slightly. As you all know, safety is one of our top priorities, Jason continued. So the board has approved an internal initiative to improve energy efficiency and prepare for future green upgrades. That includes laying preliminary groundwork for natural gas conversion down the line. We're working with a small contracting team to begin the process. You'll see minor sidewalk access and soil testing over the coming weeks. Nothing disruptive. My fingers curled into fists on my lap. He didn't say which contractor, he didn't say when, he didn't say with whose permission. Someone in the audience raised their hand. Wait, I thought the city had to approve gas line work. Jason grinned. These aren't operational lines. Think of this as infrastructure preparation future-proofing. It's within the HOA's rights on common property. It was slippery phrasing, dangerous phrasing. I stood. Will you be filing excavation permits with the city? I asked. Jason paused just for a second, then smiled as if he were glad I asked. For now, Tom, we're staying within HOA jurisdiction. Nothing invasive. You'll get a letter if your property is affected. That was a lie. Every property would be affected if pressurized lines went in, even inactive ones. Because inactive doesn't mean safe. It means untested, undocumented, and possibly volatile. After the meeting, I approached him, quietly, firmly. You know you can't legally install gas conduits without a dig notification and safety clearance, right? Even prep work has to be declared. He didn't look at me, just flipped through his clipboard. Tom, you're retired. Maybe it's time you stop worrying about things that aren't your concern. I took out my phone, showed him a still from the trail cam. I've got footage, I said. 2 a.m. trenching. No safety signage. No crew identification. No city permits filed. Jason's eyes darted to the image, then back up. You shouldn't be filming board activities without consent. Board activities, I raised an eyebrow. Then you're admitting the board authorized it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You keep pushing this, you'll regret it. You're not the authority here anymore. He walked off before I could answer. But I already had his answer. In that one defensive sentence, he'd tied the HOA directly to the work I'd documented. And now I had a target. That night, I reviewed the HOA bylaws, again top to bottom. Section 14.7 specifically prohibited any structural or subterranean modification to common or adjacent property without approval by city code enforcement and notice to adjacent homeowners. If they were trenching anywhere near private driveways or fences, and they were, they'd already violated multiple lines of their own charter. And city law was even clearer. Every utility excavation gas or otherwise required a 72-hour pre-dig notification under blue stake law. Even exploratory drilling, even if you were just future-proofing. So I made a few calls. First to the city planning office where I still had friends from my working years. They checked the permit filings. Nothing for gas conduit in Maplebrook Estates, not for that week, not for the past 6 months. Then I called the Utilities Oversight Division. Any active excavation or pressurized line installations have to be flagged, to us, the clerk said. If someone's bypassing that, it's illegal and extremely dangerous. I emailed her the trail cam footage. Jesus, she muttered when she called me back. I'll escalate this. Don't confront them further. Okay. But I knew better. In HOA land, silence was an invitation for escalation, and I just pushed back. The next morning, I stepped outside to find a stack of notices zip-tied to my mailbox. 4 violations, all backdated. Unapproved fence modification, garbage bins left visible, unsanctioned surveillance equipment, failure to submit landscaping plan. It was laughable. My fence had been unchanged for 6 years. My trash bins were behind the gate, and the surveillance equipment was a trail cam pointed at my own lawn. But that was how they operated, paper bullets. They couldn't silence me legally, so they tried to bury me under nuisance violations. It was intimidation thinly veiled behind HOA letterhead. I documented everything. Then I filed a formal complaint with the city inspector's office. And still the smell got stronger. By week's end, 3 more neighbors quietly admitted they'd noticed it too. One said her dog refused to walk along the southern sidewalk stretch. Another said their carbon monoxide detector had tripped once, even though their home ran electric. I asked them to go on record. They all refused. No offense, one of them whispered, But we saw what they're doing to you. I can't have them targeting my kids too. It was already bigger than me. And the longer the board denied it, the more unstable it all became, literally and legally. Jason and his crew were threading a bomb beneath our feet, and it was only a matter of time before something sparked. The thing about gas leaks is they don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper until the whisper turns into a scream. That's what I kept telling myself every morning I stepped outside and caught that familiar acrid tang in the air. It would hit like a faint echo drifting through the low morning mist and vanish just as quickly. But I knew it was there. Something under the ground was building pressure, and the pressure was not going to wait for permission. I tried again, one last time, to go through the proper channels. I drafted a formal letter professionally worded citing both the HOA's own bylaws and state excavation laws. I included stills from the trail cam footage diagrams highlighting where the trenching occurred and a request to halt all underground operations until a city inspection could be completed. I sent it certified mail to every board member and hand-delivered a copy to Jason Landry himself. His reaction was instant. He stood on his porch waving the envelope in one hand like it was a ransom note. "You think sending threats and legalese is going to scare us, Tom?" he called out across his lawn. "You're not a city inspector. You're just a bored old man with a chip on his shoulder." I didn't dignify it with a response. I just turned, walked back across the street, and wrote everything down: time, date, quote, tone. It would all matter later, because I already knew what was going to happen. I wasn't the only one with concerns, though. Word was getting out, if only in whispers. At the local hardware store, someone tapped me on the shoulder and quietly said, "They dug near the storm drains last week. Didn't call 811. I saw it myself." I asked if he'd be willing to talk to the city. He shook his head and walked away. Fear had settled over Maplebrook like fog, thin enough to see through, thick enough to choke on. 2 days later, a manila envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside were printed photos, blurry, grainy, taken from inside a vehicle. Each one showed the HOA's contractors digging without protective gear. No trench supports, no gas monitors. In one image, a lit cigarette dangled from a worker's mouth while he crouched by exposed piping. That wasn't just negligent, that was criminal. I uploaded the entire set to a private Google Drive and shared it with the city inspector and a contact I had at the local news station. I didn't go public. Not yet. But the fuse had been lit. It was just a matter of how fast it would burn. That weekend, during one of my morning walks, I noticed a fresh trench being covered up at the corner of Redwood Court and Cypress Bend, the oldest part of the neighborhood. The soil was loose, and the line of disturbed earth curved toward the main junction box at the streetlight. That meant they were working near electrical utilities now. Gas and electric lines side by side. A recipe for disaster. I started snapping pictures with my phone when a black SUV pulled up. Windows tinted. It idled for a moment before the driver's side door opened and out stepped a man I didn't recognize. He wore a vest with no insignia and a Bluetooth headset. He didn't smile. "You're Tom Keenan?" he asked, like he already knew the answer. "I am." "You're interfering with contracted work. That's a liability issue. I'm going to need you to leave the area." "This is a public easement," I replied, lifting my camera higher. "And I'm documenting an illegal dig that could endanger lives." The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Put the phone down." I didn't move. He stared at me for a few more seconds, then got back in the SUV and drove off. I made 3 calls that night to the city, to my contact at Channel 5, and to a lawyer I used to work with in municipal code enforcement. His name was Rick Mendoza. A man with a deep voice, sharp mind, and a memory like a steel trap. "You've got a real case here," he said after reviewing my files. "If they're trenching near utility lines without permits, it's not just civil, it's felony-level negligence." He paused. "But you need to understand something, Tom. Once you go public, there's no going back. They'll come after your reputation, your finances, maybe even try to get you removed from the HOA. I'm not worried about that." He sighed. "I know you're not. That's what worries me." We agreed to wait 2 more days. Rick would quietly file a cease and desist demand, and the city inspector would show up unannounced to check the dig sites. If there was even a hint of unpermitted gas infrastructure, everything would go on hold. Except the city inspector never made it. The morning of the inspection, I waited out front with my notes maps and video. Nothing. No one showed. I called the office voicemail. I checked the city portal, no visit logged. Hours passed. Then around 4 p.m., I got a call from a blocked number. They canceled it, the voice said. It was the clerk from the Utilities Oversight Division whispering like she was in a closet. Someone on the city council pulled it from the schedule. I wasn't supposed to tell you. I felt my stomach twist. Someone was protecting the HOA. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just bad judgment or sloppy management. This was coordinated. Someone with power, maybe a connection in City Hall, was keeping the board insulated. That made it even more dangerous. Because now the damage wouldn't just be physical. It would be political, legal, systemic. And then 2 nights later I heard it again. That faint hiss. Not loud, not violent, just persistent. Like air slowly bleeding from something under pressure. I crouched near the sidewalk, just past the edge of my lawn. I held a lighter near the soil, not to ignite anything, God no, but to see if the flame flickered unnaturally. It did, just barely. My daughter came out with a flashlight and saw me kneeling. "Dad, what are you doing?" I looked up at her and said the words I hadn't said aloud until that moment. I think something's about to explode. The violation notices came in a flurry, 6 envelopes in 3 days, all bearing the cold formal typeface of the HOA, Maplebrook Estates Board of Covenants and Compliance. The first one accused me of harboring unpermitted surveillance equipment. That was the trail cam I'd mounted on my own property, behind my own hedge, facing a public sidewalk. The second cited non-conforming foliage, claiming the hedge was overgrown beyond aesthetic limits by approximately 3.2 inches. The third was the real kicker, verbal aggression toward authorized contractors. No time, no date, no names. Just a vague warning that further hostile behavior would result in a community hearing and potentially suspension of homeowner privileges. Homeowner privileges. Like this was a club. Like my right to question what they were burying beneath my feet had suddenly become optional. It was clear now they weren't just stonewalling. They were coming for me. I sat at the dining room table that night, with a stack of their letters fanned out like playing cards. My daughter Claire poured me a glass of sweet tea and sat across from me quiet for a moment before asking, "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. She was 25, living with me while finishing her nursing program. Her mother, my wife, was the kind of person who would have baked muffins for the HOA meetings, even if they spat in her face. Claire didn't have that trait. She had my stubbornness. "I'm going to bury them," I finally said. Not with words, with facts. The next day, I filed formal responses to every violation. I cited the exact sections of the HOA bylaws they were twisting. I provided time-stamped photos, receipts, and GPS-tagged data showing that everything on my property, every fence post, every hedge, every camera, was well within their own guidelines. I CC'd the city's legal review division on each response. Then I filed a complaint for harassment. The board didn't respond in writing, but they sent a different message. 3 days later, a uniformed HOA compliance officer showed up with a clipboard and a body camera, escorted by a private security guard. Not police, private. "We've received reports of ongoing violations," the officer said flatly, not making eye contact. Claire stepped out onto the porch before I could speak. "You have no jurisdiction on this property," she said, her voice sharp. "Unless you're carrying a city inspection badge or a warrant, you're trespassing." The guard shifted uneasily. "We have the authority to conduct visual inspections from the sidewalk," he started. "You're standing on our steps," she snapped. "That's private. Leave." They left, but not before slipping another violation notice under the doormat. That one accused me of creating an environment of hostility within the community. I laughed out loud when I read it. Loud enough that Claire peeked back out. "Do you ever get tired of being right?" she asked. "Only when it's about things that can kill us," I said. That weekend, I heard the digging again just before sunrise. I crept down the street with my phone camera ready and saw the same unmarked van, the same crew, no helmets, no safety signs. This time, they were less than 20 feet from a residential gas meter. I stepped out from the shadow of a neighbor's hedge and said, "Who do you work for?" The nearest man froze. He was young, couldn't have been older than 25, and looked more like a temp hire than a trained contractor. "We're with Municipal Utilities," he mumbled, clearly lying. "No, you're not," I said, raising my phone. "Because if you were, you'd be wearing hard hats, have a marked truck, and your name would be in the city's project schedule. But it's not." I checked. Another man shouted from the van, "Hey, "You're not allowed to film us. You're on public land, and I'm documenting an ongoing threat to public safety," I replied calmly. That was when the first man lunged. He didn't hit me, but he reached for my phone, and that was enough. I stepped back, nearly twisting my ankle, on the uneven grass, and Claire, God bless her, came running down the street from the house barefoot and furious. "Touch him again, and I swear I'll press charges," she yelled. They backed off, and 10 seconds later, the van peeled out, gravel flying behind it. That night, I sent everything video timestamps incident summary to Rick Mendoza. His reply came 5 minutes later. "Oh, we're done playing nice." The next morning, we filed for an emergency injunction through county court to force a stop work order on any and all underground excavation within Maplebrook until an independent city safety audit could be performed. We included sworn affidavits, the trail cam footage photos of the crew trespassing, and written documentation of the HOA's retaliatory fines. And we didn't stop there. Rick had a contact in the Department of Energy Safety, a woman named Marissa Wills, who specialized in unauthorized gas infrastructure complaints. Once she got wind of our evidence, she scheduled an on-site visit within 48 hours. Except, of course, the HOA wouldn't go quietly. That same afternoon, I got an email the HOA board had called a special closed-door community meeting to discuss problematic homeowner behavior. No agenda, no transparency, just threats now aimed at turning the entire neighborhood against me. But it was too late. The fuse had already been lit. The inspections were coming. The city couldn't look away anymore. And somewhere under our feet, pressure was building. Something was going to blow. The only question left was, who would survive it? It was always the silence that gave them away. I'd spent enough years on construction sites to know the difference between sanctioned work and shadow jobs. A legal crew is noisy by necessity. Radios crackling, machinery groaning, supervisors barking out OSHA codes. But what was happening under Maplebrook's sidewalks wasn't that. It was quiet, almost secretive. And the quieter they got, the more dangerous I knew it was becoming. 2 nights after Claire and I confronted the trench crew, I couldn't sleep. The air was thick with summer humidity and the faint chemical tang that had become all too familiar. Around 1:30 a.m., I stepped out with a flashlight and walked the perimeter of our street. I kept to the grass and shadows, ears straining for the hiss of shovels or the low grind of rented machinery. I didn't have to wait long. Near the corner of Cypress Bend, I spotted movement. A small backhoe, rented no company logo, was parked beside a pile of fresh earth. 3 men in reflective vests were clustered around what looked like a long PVC pipe running parallel to the sidewalk. No safety cones, no flashing lights, no inspector in sight. I took a photo, then another, but something didn't sit right. I crept closer, ducking behind an azalea bush on the corner lot, and that's when I saw it. The pipe wasn't PVC. It was coated steel, thicker lined with markings I recognized, pressure-rated natural gas conduit. I froze. If they were laying pressurized lines without permits, without maps, without a single licensed technician present, then we weren't just dealing with HOA arrogance anymore. We were sitting on a bomb. I texted Rick Mendoza immediately. 1:47 a.m. They're laying steel gas lines. No safety gear, no license. This is officially criminal. I have photos. He responded instantly. Get clear, now. I'm forwarding this to Marissa and the State Fire Marshal's office. Don't engage. But I couldn't leave just yet. I moved to a better angle, phone pressed tight in my hands, and caught a moment on video, one worker striking a pipe casing with a hammer, sparks flying off into the dirt. I sucked in a breath. They were careless, rushed, likely untrained, which meant mistakes weren't just possible, they were imminent. I slipped back toward home, heart pounding, like it hadn't since my final year on the job. At 2:06 a.m., I uploaded the footage to 3 separate drives and sent copies to Rick, Marissa, and my own daughter just in case. Then I sat at the kitchen table and waited for daylight. By 9:00 a.m., Marissa Wills was on the phone with me directly. Her voice was clipped, professional, urgent. I've reviewed your footage. That line is a 2-inch steel flex with industrial-grade couplings. That's not residential supply, that's sub-main distribution. Who authorized this? No one, I said, at least not legally. She muttered something under her breath, then added, I've escalated this to state enforcement. I'm sending a fire marshal team and utility safety inspector out within 24 hours. They will need unrestricted access to the site. They'll have it, I said. But you'd better come armed with more than just clipboards. These people don't care about laws. They care about control. That afternoon, I noticed something new. The HOA bulletin board at the clubhouse had been updated with a full-color flyer. Community Gas Upgrade Phase 2 underway. Thanks to our partnership with Mid-County Energy Consulting, Maplebrook Estates is taking the next step toward green energy and self-reliance. All work is authorized under HOA Resolution 42B. Homeowner participation is not required. No permits, no signatures, just a resolution no one had seen or voted on. But what sent a chill down my spine was the name Mid-County Energy Consulting. I'd heard of them before in a lawsuit involving another HOA 2 towns over. Their crew was accused of a backfill accident that ruptured a sewer main and led to a lawsuit in excess of $2.3 million. I printed the flyer and added it to the growing dossier I kept in a thick binder labeled Evidence. Maplebrook Hazard Ops. By evening, trucks started arriving again. This time, they weren't unmarked. They bore the Mid-County logo, but no license numbers, no posted crew lists, and again, no permits taped to the windows. But something else had changed too. 2 more neighbors approached me in private, one on the sidewalk, while pretending to walk her dog, the other at the grocery store by the milk fridge. They dug behind my fence line, the first whispered. Near the garden bed. I didn't approve anything. They broke a sprinkler line, said the second. When I complained, they said it was part of the energy upgrade and not their responsibility. People were waking up, not all at once, but enough. That night, I sent out a private email to every homeowner whose address I had titled, Urgent, what your HOA isn't telling you about the gas lines. In it, I explained what was happening. I attached links to the footage, diagrams, and flyers. I used simple language. They are installing unauthorized, dangerous infrastructure under your homes. 24 hours later, I had 26 replies, most fearful, a few angry, but all of them sharing one common phrase. Well, what can we do? And that was the crack in the armor. That was the sound of the dam beginning to break. The day before the explosion was unusually quiet. No trenching crews, no trucks, not a single clipboard-wielding compliance officer in sight. It felt like the neighborhood had exhaled finally after weeks of tension. Maybe someone had pulled the plug, but I didn't trust it. I knew enough about infrastructure to understand what silence meant in a situation like this. Either they were pausing before a final push, or they were already finished. And if they were finished and that piping had been pressurized without testing, without markers, without oversight, then we weren't just in danger. We were already inside the blast zone. That evening, I received a text from Marissa Wills. State inspector arrives at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Final legal stop work notice being prepared. Stay alert. I replied with a thumbs up, but my gut told me we weren't going to make it that far. Claire cooked dinner pasta with roasted vegetables, her favorite stress meal, and we sat in uneasy silence. Halfway through, she asked, "Do you think it's going to happen soon?" I didn't answer. I just looked down at my plate, my appetite shrinking with every hour the pressure stayed trapped underground. Around midnight, I checked my trail cam footage one last time. No movement, but the smell was back stronger than ever, curling up from the cracks between the sidewalk and the curb. Not just near my home, everywhere. It was 1:04 a.m. when it happened. I remember the exact moment. I was sitting at my desk, organizing the latest email responses from concerned neighbors, when the windows began to tremble first, with a low rumble like distant thunder rolling through rock, then with a sharp crack that made the floor jump beneath me. Then came the sound. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no fiery boom or chorus of shattering glass. It was deeper, heavier. A sudden, terrifying roar from beneath the surface, followed by an impact wave that knocked the pictures off my walls and blew the back door open with a gust of compressed air. Claire screamed from her bedroom, and I bolted to her. We barely had time to react before the power flickered and the house trembled again this time, with the deep, gut-shaking force of a second detonation, somewhere farther down the street. Sirens started before I could even grab my shoes. When we stumbled out onto the front lawn, we were met by chaos. Flames danced 2 blocks down, painting the sky orange. Smoke billowed through the hedges. Our neighbor's car alarm was blaring as fire trucks screamed around the corner and police lights strobed the shadows. A section of Cypress Bend was gone. The road cracked in half like something had punched through from underneath and swallowed a 30-foot stretch of pavement. 3 homes were engulfed in flame. A 4th had collapsed entirely, the front porch now sitting inside what looked like a sinkhole or crater. Water sprayed from a sheared hydrant. A tree had fallen across the road, split at the base. And the smell, raw gas, metallic and hot, was everywhere. I stood there stunned as Claire clutched my arm and whispered, "Oh my God, you were right." No joy, no satisfaction, just dread. Then I saw him. Jason Landry, HOA president, architect of this madness, standing near the edge of the blast zone, in a bathrobe and slippers, face pale and streaked with soot. His hands trembled. One side of his hair was singed. He looked at me like I was the ghost of every warning he had ever ignored. We locked eyes. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. I moved, fast instincts from another life kicking in. I flagged down a fire captain, identified myself, and told him everything. Every trench, every photograph, every violation. When I mentioned the illegal gas lines and Mid-County's involvement, his face changed. "You're saying this was avoidable?" I nodded. This wasn't just avoidable. It was reported weeks ago, multiple times. He swore under his breath and keyed his radio. Within minutes, I was standing in front of a command van, giving an official statement to emergency responders and a state fire marshal. I handed over a flash drive with files I'd prepared days earlier just in case. Claire took charge of organizing our neighbors. She moved people away from danger zones, grabbed spare blankets from our house, and calmed a panicked woman who couldn't find her dog. All those years watching her mother nurse others, it had stuck. By 4 a.m., the fire was contained. By 5, the street was cordoned off with police tape and floodlights. By sunrise, the media had arrived. News vans, drones, and stunned reporters circled the destruction like vultures searching for the truth buried under ash and twisted pipe. But I didn't wait for them to come to me. I walked right up to the nearest camera crew, introduced myself, and said the words I'd been preparing for weeks. This was not an accident. This was negligence, and we tried to stop it. The story spread fast. Gas explosion levels, HOA Street was on the 7 a.m. broadcast. Homeowners say they warned board for weeks, followed at 9. By lunch, the name Mid-County Energy Consulting was trending online for all the wrong reasons. But none of that could undo what was lost. 3 families displaced, 2 injuries, one of them serious, and a whole neighborhood now waking up to the fact that the people sworn to protect their property had endangered it instead. The ground didn't just roar that night. It screamed the truth. And now the world was listening. The morning after the explosion, Maplebrook didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a disaster zone. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze. Sections of the street were cordoned off by metal barriers hastily installed by city workers. Fire trucks idled in the cul-de-sac with their ladders still extended, their lights off, but their presence undeniable. A fleet of unmarked white vans from the Department of Energy Safety pulled in before 7 a.m., followed closely by county investigators, utility inspectors, and a camera crew from Channel 5 News. The air was heavy with the scent of scorched insulation and wet ash. Debris littered the sidewalks, splintered lumber roof shingles, twisted metal. One neighbor's trampoline had somehow landed upside down in the community pool. I hadn't slept. None of us had. Claire was running purely on adrenaline, helping organize bottled water, distributing blankets, and translating technical jargon from responders for confused families. She had always been sharp, but in the chaos, she was surgical, moving with clarity, purpose. I saw her hand off a first aid kit to the Marinos, whose back deck had collapsed during the explosion. She hugged their daughter, wiped soot from the child's cheek. She had her mother's heart, but I couldn't focus on that just yet. I had a meeting to get to. By 8:15 a.m., I stood in front of an oak-paneled desk inside the mobile command unit, across from the state fire marshal, 2 engineers from the Utilities Commission, and Marissa Wills herself. She looked tired but sharp. No small talk. "Mr. Keenan," the fire marshal said, "we've reviewed the footage and documentation you provided. We need to walk you through our findings." I nodded, bracing myself. "The blast originated beneath the western edge of Cypress Bend, exactly where your photos showed unauthorized steel piping being installed. Our investigators have confirmed the lines were pressurized without pressure testing or grounding. They also intersected a live electrical conduit approximately 30 inches deep." He paused. "We believe the initial ignition was caused by an electrical arc from that conduit, likely due to improperly insulated contact with the metal pipe. From there, the gas followed the line under the street and ignited in 2 additional pockets, causing the secondary blasts. So it had happened exactly the way I feared. All of it preventable. Marissa leaned in. Based on preliminary evidence, we're filing emergency injunctions against both Mid-County Energy Consulting and the HOA board of Maplebrook Estates. I blinked. Wait, the whole board? She nodded. Their Resolution 42B was not filed with the county. No public vote occurred. And several signatures on the document appear to be forged. My stomach twisted. Forged? Possibly the treasurer, Mrs. Grady. She's missing. Left town last night. Of course she did. The fire marshal continued. For now, all work in Maplebrook is suspended under a statewide safety freeze. Civil litigation will follow, possibly criminal charges. I exhaled slowly. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. Before I left, Marissa added one more thing. We'd like you to consider speaking at the upcoming city council meeting. A first-hand statement from a resident would go a long way toward making this public, toward reform. I nodded. I'll do it. Outside the command trailer, the street had shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. Where once people would avert their eyes, now they came toward me. One by one, neighbors approached, some with tears, some with quiet thanks, others simply with the weight of unspoken apologies. The Rodales brought me a Tupperware of still-warm breakfast casserole and said, "We didn't believe you. I'm so sorry." The trans, who had always kept their distance, shook my hand and said, "You saved lives." Even Jason Landry, wrapped in a loaned Red Cross blanket, approached me with a blank, broken look. His eyes were glassy. His voice cracked. "I didn't know," he muttered. "Yes," I said, "you did." He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just nodded and walked away, leaving behind a trail of ash on the sidewalk. By late afternoon, news outlets from across the state had descended on the neighborhood. Reporters swarmed the burned homes, the crater in the street, the temporary shelter set up near the elementary school gym. I tried to avoid them, but one eventually cornered me. "You were the first to raise the alarm, right? Why didn't anyone stop this?" I looked at the camera, tired but clear-eyed. "Because the people in charge didn't want to listen," I said. And when authority ignores safety, disaster isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The clip aired on the evening broadcast. Within hours, my inbox exploded. Emails from homeowners in other HOAs. Municipal workers, engineers, lawyers. People who'd seen their own communities flirt with danger and felt powerless to intervene. People who had fought and lost. People who had been silenced. But now they were speaking again. The silence was broken. Later that night, as I stood on my porch with Claire beside me, I looked down the street. The destruction was immense, but it was honest now. Exposed. No longer hidden beneath polished sidewalks and HOA newsletters. No longer whispered in closed-door meetings. And for the first time in months, I felt the faintest breath of something I hadn't dared hope for in weeks. Relief. 3 days after the explosion, I found myself sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of a city government building, waiting to give my formal deposition. My statement had already been requested by the Department of Energy Safety, the county fire marshal, and the city council. Now attorneys representing displaced homeowners were reaching out too, each of them looking for the paper trail I'd been quietly building for weeks. But not everyone viewed me as the neighborhood's reluctant whistleblower. Because when people start asking who knew what, and when they eventually ask why someone didn't do more to stop it, by the time the lawsuits began piling up, I wasn't just the man who tried to stop the HOA. I was now a central figure in a statewide investigation into negligence cover-ups and a multi-million-dollar infrastructure scandal. And with that kind of spotlight came suspicion. It began subtly. An anonymous comment on a news article. Why was Keenan filming all this? Almost like he knew it would blow. Then came a voicemail from a blocked number. Your fingerprints are all over this. Don't get too comfortable. I played the message twice. The voice was distorted, mechanical, but the intent was clear. When you drag corruption into the light, the shadows always push back. Rick Mendoza, my attorney, didn't flinch. They're trying to discredit the only person with a clean trail, he told me over coffee. We have time-stamped videos, emails, certified letters. Let them dig. We want them to dig. But what if someone planted something I asked? What if they claim I tampered with the site? They'd have to disprove your timeline, he replied. which fortunately you documented better than the HOA documented anything. Still, the pressure was real. My name was now public. Journalists camped near my street. A reporter even approached Claire at the grocery store, asking if her father had a grudge against the HOA. She didn't dignify it with a response, just walked away with her head high and told me later, "Let them dig. We know what you did." And we did. Because while others had buried their shame, I had archived the truth. Every file, every photo, every HOA violation and response, all of it had been duplicated, encrypted and stored across 3 locations: flash drives, cloud storage, printed binders. I even gave a copy to a friend at the city planning department for safekeeping. But it wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. The state's investigation was growing faster than anyone expected. Turns out Mid-County Energy had done similar work for 3 other HOA communities, none of which had proper permits. 2 of those neighborhoods now reported minor gas leaks. 1 had already filed suit. The dominoes were falling. Jason Landry, meanwhile, had vanished from public view. The HOA board's lawyer issued a brief statement saying Jason was receiving medical care and not available for comment. But word on the street was he'd lawyered up and was trying to negotiate immunity in exchange for cooperation. The real surprise came during a closed-door meeting with state investigators. We have reason to believe, one agent said carefully, that the HOA board funneled funds from the community reserve budget to Mid-County under falsified maintenance invoices. Rick raised an eyebrow. How much? Over $400,000. I leaned back stunned. $400,000. Enough to hire a real contractor, get real permits. Enough to have done the work safely. But they didn't want safe. They wanted fast, quiet, invisible. And that had blown a crater into our neighborhood and into their futures. I was asked to provide sworn testimony before a special subcommittee forming to review HOA oversight practices statewide. Rick advised me to prepare for tough questions. "They'll want to know why you didn't go public earlier," he warned. "I tried," I said. "I filed complaints, letters, reports." "Then stand firm on that," he told me. "Tell them the truth, every dirty detail." So I did. In a windowless conference room under oath, I told the story again this time, for the official record. I walked them through every ignored email, every anonymous trench crew, every photograph of unmarked steel pipe, and every retaliatory fine shoved into my mailbox. At one point, a committee member leaned forward and asked Mr. Keenan, "Why didn't you walk away? Why not just move rather than fight?" I looked her square in the eyes. "Because my wife died in a gas explosion," I said quietly. "Because I know what it feels like to bury someone whose death could have been prevented. And because no one else was going to stop them." She sat back and didn't ask another question. After the testimony, a woman approached me outside the hearing room. She wore a worn gray coat and carried a manila folder filled with papers. "You don't know me," she said, "but I used to live in a mid-county managed HOA. I tried to speak up too. They shut me down." She handed me the folder. Inside were old invoices, inspection reports, and copies of emails proof that her HOA had pushed similar trench work without permits. "You're not alone," she said. For the first time since the blast, I believed her. That night, I went home and found Claire on the porch with 2 mugs of hot tea waiting. We sat in silence, watching the last of the inspection teams load into their trucks. The scorched homes still stood like skeletons in the dark, lit by temporary lights strung between utility poles. "Do you think they'll rebuild?" she asked. "They'll have to," I said. "The ground might have cracked, but the truth's finally come up through it." She smiled just barely. "You know, I think Mom would have been proud." I didn't say anything. I just stared into the night, wondering how something buried so deep had finally been brought into the open, and how it had nearly taken all of us with it. The lawsuits came like a landslide. Within 2 weeks of the explosion, 5 separate civil suits were filed against the Maplebrook Estates HOA Board, Mid-County Energy Consulting, and in some cases, individual contractors. Displaced homeowners were suing for damages. Insurance companies were suing for negligence, and the city itself filed a motion to investigate misuse of community funds under fraud statutes. Then came the criminal charges. Jason Landry was arrested in his driveway at dawn. News cameras caught the whole thing, him in a hoodie, trying to shield his face as officers cuffed him. The charges were staggering: falsifying official documents, endangering public safety, misuse of community funds, obstruction of a city inspection. He was later released on bail, but by then, His name was plastered across every local station and shared 1,000 times online. Other board members followed. Mrs. Grady, the HOA treasurer who'd vanished after the explosion, was found living with a cousin in Alabama. She was brought back under a bench warrant. 2 more board members lawyered up and turned over their emails in exchange for leniency. The whole machine, the smug, untouchable system that had ruled Maplebrook for years, was being disassembled piece by piece, and I was in the center of it. Not because I wanted to be, because I had to be. My deposition was used as primary evidence in multiple cases. Investigators told me my documentation helped fast-track the city's decision to refer the HOA to the state attorney general. Claire and I were both asked to testify during a public town hall hearing that streamed live across 3 networks. Standing at that podium, I read from a simple piece of paper. No theatrics, no anger, just the truth. I didn't want this, I said. None of us did. But when you bury danger and ignore warnings, you're not just gambling with infrastructure. You're gambling with lives. This wasn't about property. It was about people. And those people deserve better. The room went quiet. And in that stillness, I felt it, the power of truth said plainly without fear. The very next week, a motion passed through City Council that would change everything. Maplebrook's HOA charter was officially suspended, pending full restructuring. An interim trustee, an actual civil engineer from the city's public safety department, was appointed to oversee all operations until new elections could be held. HOA power had been stripped. The bylaws would be rewritten, this time with resident oversight. That night, I opened my email to find a message from someone I hadn't expected: the mayor. Mr. Keenan, I watched your testimony. Thank you for your service, not just to your neighborhood, but to this city. There was an attachment, a formal invitation to join a new HOA reform committee being formed at the city level. Its goal: create safer, more transparent standards for all future HOA operations. Claire read over my shoulder. You going to do it? I don't know, I said. I'm tired. Yeah, but you're also the only person I know who could scare the devil back into a corner with just a spreadsheet. I smiled. That's not a no. Meanwhile, reconstruction efforts in Maplebrook were underway. The city offered emergency grants to displaced homeowners. Volunteers from across the county helped clear debris. The 2 most damaged homes were torn down within a week, the lots sealed off with safety tape, and regrading crews assigned. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. But it was something. The damage was more than physical, though. Neighbors still whispered, still walked cautiously around the crater left in the middle of Cypress Bend. Some couldn't sleep through the night. Others packed up and moved, entirely unwilling to live above ground that had betrayed them. But there was also resilience. People began talking again, not in fear but in solidarity. Block parties were organized not by the board, but by volunteers. Claire started a neighborhood safety group. They bought carbon monoxide detectors in bulk and handed them out for free. And one afternoon, a group of kids set up a lemonade stand at the foot of the street. A sign read, "All money goes to rebuild Mrs. Soto's garden." That night, I walked down and gave them $50. I hadn't seen Jason Landry since his arrest, but rumor had it he was negotiating a plea deal. He wouldn't see jail time, but he'd never serve on an HOA board again. Mid-County Energy was hit with over $3.8 million in penalties and was barred from operating in the state for 5 years. Justice wasn't always a gavel pounding in a courtroom. Sometimes it was a neighborhood rebuilding with its own hands. One morning, about a month after the blast, I sat on the porch with Claire. We sipped coffee, staring out at the newly paved sidewalk, the fresh utility flags dotting the ground, the city crews repainting the curb numbers. "You know," she said softly, "this place used to feel like a prison." I looked around, and now, she paused, then smiled. "Now it feels like we tore down the walls." 6 months later, the neighborhood finally breathed. The scent of scorched pavement had faded, replaced by the sweet bite of fresh-cut grass and new mulch. The crater on Cypress Bend had been repaved smooth and even with proper signage, and steel-plated safety grates installed along the rerouted utility lines. Where once stood the burned skeletons of 3 homes, 2 new frames were going up, contractors, this time, wearing proper safety vests, permits posted on temporary fencing, building it right from the ground up. The HOA was gone. Officially dissolved after a full city council vote with new laws in place, requiring oversight committees for any future residential governing body. What replaced it wasn't a board, but a neighborhood trust, overseen by a rotating panel of volunteer homeowners and a liaison from the city's public safety department. No more secret meetings, no more fake resolutions, no more buried danger. And yet the scars remained. Some were visible cracks in driveway cement that no one bothered to patch the faint outlines of ash stains on sidewalk concrete. A lamppost that still leaned ever so slightly from the pressure wave. But other scars ran deeper, quiet ones, emotional ones. Claire still woke up at odd hours sometimes, wandering to the kitchen for water, with her eyes half open, haunted by the night the ground erupted. She never talked about it directly, but she was more cautious now, more alert. She always checked the carbon monoxide detector twice before bed. And me, I'd started taking longer walks. Not out of anxiety, but out of observation. I became the unofficial watchman of Maplebrook. People started waving when I passed by. Some asked for advice about their fences or wanted to know how to properly report potholes. Others just offered coffee. I never went back to the HOA meetings because there were no meetings anymore. And I never heard from Jason Landry again. Last I knew, he'd taken a job out of state far from homeowners and accountability. Good riddance. But the strangest part wasn't what we lost. It was what we gained. Freedom. No one sent me violation letters anymore. I painted my mailbox red bright, unapologetic red, and no one said a word. Claire planted wildflowers instead of HOA-approved grass along the front bed, and neighbors complimented her on the color. One Saturday afternoon, a kid named Marcus, he lived on the corner of Redfern Lane, knocked on my door holding a school project about neighborhood safety. He asked if I would mind being interviewed. Said his teacher called me a community activist. I laughed. I'm just a guy who got tired of being quiet. He asked me what I'd do differently if I could go back. And I thought about it. About the warnings I'd tried to give. About the silence that met them. About the explosion. The lawsuits. The hearings. The homes reduced to rubble. And about the neighbors who now stopped to shake my hand instead of avoid eye contact. Nothing, I told him. Because sometimes the only way forward is through fire. When he left, I sat on the porch and watched as Claire and two other young women from the block hosted a little safety workshop for the kids. They showed how to test smoke detectors, how to call 911, how to recognize a gas leak. There were handouts and juice boxes and a laminated sign that read, Maplebrook, safe and strong. That was Claire's idea. Her mother would have loved it. Later that evening, we walked down the newly rebuilt sidewalk where the main blast had occurred. A small bronze plaque had been embedded in the concrete by the city. I hadn't seen it before. It read, In memory of the night the ground broke and the truth rose up with it, may we never bury our voices again. Claire reached out and took my hand. You ready to rest now, Dad? She asked. I nodded slowly, eyes still on the plaque. Yeah, I think we've earned it. There was no ceremony, no parade, no banner strung across the cul-de-sac proclaiming, mission accomplished. But there was healing. There was light in the windows again. Children laughing on bikes. The sound of a hammer not in secrecy, but in progress. A community not governed by fear, but held together by shared survival. And as the sun set behind the newly painted rooftops of Maplebrook, I realized that justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, cumulative. Sometimes it's as simple as being able to sleep through the night knowing the ground beneath you is safe. Not perfect, but safe. And no HOA letter can take that away again.